staff level would be yes. And again, there's a lot of things that go into the parklet process that aren't applicable to consent agenda and special privilege proceeding items.
Trustee McKay.
And in my mind, structuring it that way does make sense, because if all special privileges can be revoked due to violation or multiple complaints that can't be resolved, and a business wouldn't necessarily need to lose both its outdoor seating if the issue was with a parklet or vice versa. So in my mind, structuring it that way makes sense. And the reason why it's different for me than a block party is that the intent of a business is to make a profit, and it's not that I want to eat into those profits. I respect that, and that's the nature of it, but it is a business, whereas a block party is not intended to boost there's no financial gain from that privilege to the residents.
Trustee Warren.
Just a quick point of clarification. For those that already have parklets, are we charging them the initial fee when they first apply, or are we charging them a renewal fee based on the fact they've already had parklets?
My understanding is that they are simply applying for special privilege as currently established, and again, this would be a new subcategory that would be communicated and implemented upon board approval for next year's season.
Can I repeat answer this question? Would we charge them $250 or $100 if they already have a parklet?
Oh, it would be a renewal. I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Thank you. I missed it. I don't know what I was saying.
I want to make a comment too. We changed last year. There was like a we then required more electrical permits or something, more inspections for parklets, and the business community was not specifically notified, just the ones that had parklets, and they really, I just want to convey, they were very upset with that because something changed, and when they came up for renewal, they weren't able to comment. And of course, anyone can read an agenda, but it's like the bid didn't know, like it's not like we notified anyone that there was going to be a change in what you can't just, you already invested in that parklet as a pilot program, and then it changed when we became a regular program, and now we're changing fees. And I'm against changing fees, but even if the board, will was to create them, I just always feel bad that when things that are affecting businesses that are small businesses in our community, they're not made aware and had an opportunity to come and talk. I learn a lot from when they come and talk. I learned about ADA access that I didn't understand before between the tables and the parklet tables and how that affects ADA. And I'm not an operator, and so anyhow, that was just a concern that anytime, if not tonight, if we decide this, if in the future we do parking meters, or I did reach out to Erica from the bid for parking meters, and I said I need input. Like I can't, if we had voted on that tonight, I would have felt very uncomfortable. So anytime I'm just making the request, again, that if we are doing something that affects the businesses in our community, we don't have that many, if we could just reach out and let them know there could be a change and they would have the opportunity to come and speak, that would be very beneficial. Okay, any further discussion? With that, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay. Motion carries 4-2. Okay, so the next agenda item is to consider, where are we, the wheel tax. Pursue implementation, pursue implementation of a wheel tax. Mark.
Again, just putting stuff up on the wall. Recently Wauwatosa came out with, I believe they're exploring this option as well. This is not particularly new. It's one of the things that triggered staff to make sure that this board had an opportunity to voice its feeling on whether that would be an appropriate thing for this community to consider a wheel tax as a diversification of revenues opportunity. I will make a comment that at the time that we drafted this memo, I did not have specific information on the number of registered vehicles, so I put in 5,000. That number is just slightly over 7,000. I've got confirmation from the Department of Transportation on that. So hypothetically, a $20 wheel tax would then raise $140,000, not $100,000. And again, the prospective motion that direction staff would seek is to prepare the appropriate documents and resolutions to bring before the board to implement the municipal wheel tax, if that's the direction the board wants to go in. So I don't imagine that would be a spontaneous thing, it's probably a process, but you know, if that's direction the board wants to go in, we'll certainly have an information on how that might impact the 2019 budget before we conclude the budget process.
And just, can I just add some background, just because it just came from the league conference. Places like the city of Wauwatosa, as well as other in our region, are going towards implementing this because they've been begging the state for for years to give us a way to raise funding besides property taxes, because shared revenue has decreased from, like, I don't know if they returned 80% and then something like 16. It's like a huge decrease on what they return to us. We, as the city, the village of Shorewood, have not had a tax levy problem, meaning based on the revenue levy limits, we've still been able to fund all the expenses we need to fund without exceeding that. Other cities, like the city of Wauwatosa and others, they've reached that, and so they have this big gap based on they can't raise any more property taxes per the state of Wisconsin's regulations. And so this is one way they're turning to it. I don't know when the date would be, the projections of when we reach our levy limit, and then we'd have to turn to alternative sources. But I think it's great that Mark has brought this forward to tell us there's an option out there. So I personally would not be in favor of this today, but I think it's great that the board, if we don't vote for it tonight, understands it's an option and that other municipalities are starting to turn towards it, because there is no other way to raise revenue to support fire and police and the services that are core, and something to be watching out for in the future. So that's it. Does anybody have any questions or discussion?
That's my position as well.
Okay. Do we have a motion to either adopt or defer? I will make a motion to.
Yeah, do we have to?
Do we need to?
Do we have to take a motion to defer? It's not failed, it doesn't fail if there's no motion on that.
Okay, we just did it for the other items, so is that okay? All right. With that, we'll move on to, let's see, what did we do to E? So consider pursuing other revenue options, redefine parking utility scope. Mark.
Thank you. Well, again, I would hope that you had a chance to review this memo, but it's a little, maybe it merits a little more discussion than the wheel tax was pretty straightforward. So, again, historically, the village's parking utility has been used to account for all parking-related activities that require the issuance of a permit. From a fiscal perspective, the nature of creating a parking utility is fundamentally to dedicate the revenues earned to the use of those utility assets to pay for and maintain those assets, or to accumulate reserves in order to acquire additional parking assets. And that would tend to also include financial agreements for use of privately owned lots for public parking administered through the issuance of permits. So the question becomes whether or not activities related to selling permits to park on public streets is a function of the parking utility. That's open to a policy decision based on the parking utility's goals and needs. We have identified that $165,000 in revenues and $95,000 in costs related to selling permits on public streets at the time of this memo is currently being accounted for in the parking utility for a net gain of $70,000 per year. If so determined, these activities could be reclassified for general government functions and moved from the parking utility to the general fund to support other municipal operations and reduce the need for property taxes to pay for those services. Two items of note. The first one is, of course, as we get into broader on-street parking discussions, which I think is kind of coming, I would feel that conceptually now would be a fine time to make a distinction on what the scope of the parking utility is. I'm not sure there's any interest in acquiring additional parking facilities for public parking. So at that point, again, using revenues from on-street parking to squirrel away and accumulate funds. I'm just not sure where the board feels they would.
Are you saying that currently, when people pay tickets or permits, meaning like I have a hardship or I'm an apartment and I park on the street, all that revenue goes into the parking utility, and then we have a balance because the parking utility is not expending it, it's building up a reserve. We have used that reserve, we borrowed it to our water utility, correct?
Yeah, that's a short term.
Right, so that, I mean, that's one way you can utilize it if needed, but other than that, I think the balance in like 5 years or whatever, I don't know what it is today, but it goes up to like $500,000 or $600,000.
Well, it's already at that level. It goes
It
up
goes
more
up to
than
like
that.
$1 million in 10 years.
Point two,
Okay.
Monday night you cut $60,000 out of that number by eliminating it. Doesn't change, in my mind, the fundamental question of is it appropriate to segment our parking utility to really focus on servicing our lots, and that any revenues generated from parking on public streets should be a function of the general government, not the parking utility. So I would still support the motion. Obviously, the fiscal impact of that is at this point roughly about $10,000 positive as opposed to prospectively $70,000. But your two policy decisions away from making that $250,000 too. So.
Trustee McKay.
And so what would be the impact on, is there an impact on levy limit and expenditure restraint?
Levy limit would be neutral because there's sufficient revenues coming in to cover those costs. That does adversely impact expenditure restraint because you're adding more expenditures to the general fund.
Right, so currently, can I just go on that question? Because I think I understand the parking utility. Currently, we charge the parking utility for 1/4 or 1/3, I don't know which one because it changed over the years, but of police, parking checker staff, for checking that permits are in the lots, correct? And administrating it.
Enforcement of permits in general.
Right, but I'm confused on how there's such a big balance. Are we charging, how did we accumulate, this came up during the $60,000 conversation when we first instituted, I think Trustee Amenta had mentioned it at that time, of why are we even asking? Because what is causing the excess in funding in this? I mean, because are we not paying the salaries associated with on-street parking? But we're collecting the revenues and storing it in the utility? Are we paying those salaries from the general fund? Mark?
Well, the way the parking utility, again, I can only speak to the 5 years that I've been here. There's ups and downs and ebbs and flows to that in general. It's pretty steady, but
With ups and downs.
we have some administrative costs for issuing all these permits, taking all the phone calls, answering all the questions. And the people who provide those services are our customer service staff.
But do we charge their time to the utility? Okay, go ahead.
So what we do in our budget, and you'll see these tables in the proposed budget, is we allocate a percentage of those employees' labor costs to the parking utility. as well as the water and sewer utilities for doing the same thing when we get utility bills out there, questions about that. So that's the direct staff costs that go to the parking utility. The indirect costs are when we make an assumption that, you know, part of the enforcement costs of for permitted parking should be borne by the utility, because if there were no permits required, there would be no need to enforce. And that's where we have cross charges between the police department and the parking utility to support 1/4 of an officer's salary and 1/2 of
So we do, we charge
Oh,
back.
of course.
So we cover our, so my question though is, the revenue for parking enforcement for tickets goes into general fund. So this is strictly our permit fees for overnight parking. Currently, there's like 4 little zones, and for our lots. I don't understand, our parking fees, I mean, we're making $500,000 off of parking tickets that already goes to general fund. Why are the fees accumulating almost $1 million balance within the next few, you know, I can't remember if it was 5 years
I'd be
or.
happy to finish my explanation on that.